My family was a logging family, and they were French Canadian. They lived in the interior inland rainforests of British Columbia, and they horse logged. And they would selectively cut. They would be taking one or two out, leaving small gaps, and then they would haul the logs into the flumes and send them down into the lake. And getting the logs to the mouth of the river was dangerous work. And in the spring runoff, they would send the logs down. A lot of the men were on the logs with their pike poles, and sometimes they had to use dynamite because there'd be log jams, and eventually those logs would get down to the nearest mill. I loved all this, and I watched what they did, and I wanted to do it too. And I walked up those flumes with my dad and thought, I want to be a forester too. And so I went to university and I learned how to be a forester. So eventually I went and became a professor, and I continued my work trying to figure out what makes a forest unique, what makes them whole, what makes them so resilient and strong. And all that work in science and discovery led me to what we call the Mother Tree Project. So the idea of the Mother Tree Project, the goal is to test in the interior Douglas fir forests the effect of three factors and how they interact. The effect of climate and how it interacts with how we harvest forests, whether we clear cut or partially cut them, and how we plant them, whether with one or two or many species, and what the effect of all these factors are on the biodiversity of the forest, the productivity, and carbon storage, and how that might change into the future. And we're looking at the highest scale, and that's climate.
There is no country on the planet that can walk away from the challenge and reality of climate change.
No challenge poses a greater threat to future generations than climate change.
Climate is changing. How we do forestry practices are going to change as climate changes because our forests are under increasing stress. And we want to match up our practices with climate, otherwise they'll fail. And we can't afford failure. So this project is really trying to target or design forest practices so that we create forests that are healthy and resilient as climate changes. And this is super important because forests are where most of the carbon and biodiversity is housed across Canada, across North America. And once we lose these forests, if we lose these forests, then we lose so much in terms of, CO2 will be pulsed to the atmosphere, we'll lose species, we'll lose the homes for people. The climate gradient, this is a common way for scientists to look at climate effects or to experiment with climate, because of course we can't speed up time. So we use what's called space for time experiments. So we're putting this experiment across a climate gradient so that we can predict if climate dries and warms in the future, then we'll know when we look at what we did on those dry, warm areas, then what we might be able to do in forests as we go further north. 12.5.
I've been working in government and academia and the industry my whole life. And for me, the best place to be is here in the forest. I love the work. I love being out in the forest, and I love working with the young crew. So it's up to us foresters and the public, everybody can get involved. We have to work together to find solutions to help make our forests resilient as climate changes. We're experimenting with different forest practices. We're testing these different ways of harvesting the forests in the dry, hot climates of southern BC to the cool climates of the north. And we're testing different species to plant and different genotypes and comparing to how that works compared to natural regeneration. And then we're measuring the impacts of these practices on the forest, how the forest cycles carbon and nitrogen, how the critters like the forest. Mother trees are the biggest, oldest trees in the forest. And we call them mother trees because they link with the trees around them through these below-ground networks.
These are the mycorrhizal fungi.
The networks are made of fungi, mycorrhizal fungi. And these are symbionts, or fungi that associate with the trees, and they explore the soil, bringing to the tree water and nutrients, and in exchange for that, the trees provide carbon or photosynthate or food for the fungi. And these fungi can actually link up trees throughout the forest. In fact, all trees in the forest are linked together in this huge network. And the biggest hubs in the network, the biggest ones, are the mother trees.
So in this Mother Tree project, we are actually testing a range of forest practices from the driest and hottest part of British Columbia all the way up to the coldest areas where there's Douglas fir. So basically from the border with the United States up to just north of Prince George. So the Mother Tree project then tests basically five treatments. So one is the clear cut. The next retention level is what we call the seed tree method. And we're going to leave mother trees as singles in our harvesting areas. And we're going to leave about 25 stems per hectare. These are the big old mother trees. So imagine, there's going to be these single trees left in the clear cuts. We see these all the time in our landscapes. The next one is what we call a small patch retention. So we leave mother trees or clusters of mother trees with trees around the mother trees. So the idea of the small patch retention is to leave the mother tree with the protective family around her, and so that she can communicate with them and conserve and keep safe that whole community. And she does that through her mycorrhizal networks. So associated with all the root tips of the mother tree are the mycorrhizal fungi, which are linking to all the trees, whether they're strangers or seedlings, all around her. The next level of retention is actually leaving the mother tree and a cluster of mother trees with the broader community around her. So it's a larger patch retention so that she can communicate not just with her kin, but also strangers. So strangers being like the neighbors in your community, in a social community. Because we know that she communicates with these neighbors as well. And that's important for the resilience of the forest too, because with neighbors brings diversity. And then the fifth treatment is the uncut forest. So the uncut forest provides us with a kind of control. Like, what if you did nothing? How will this forest change in the future?
We need to understand what's happening on that land base and in the ecology at a much deeper level than has currently found its way into our forest management regime. And we need those longitudinal studies like the Mother Tree Project that's basically telling us what happens when you go in to a stand to take timber out, but you actually respect the natural relationships that exist there. And so you look for parts of the ecosystem that are going to allow for retention of values, that are going to feed that ecosystem and allow it to come back. And in many regards, there's similar research that we need done to what the Mother Tree Project is doing on lodgepole pine stands, where you have a low mortality and a high survival rate among lodgepole pine. Very similar. You're looking at the genotype, you're looking at what were the characteristics of survival, you're looking at those trees that somehow have adapted better to that environment. I think in the situation with climate change, having that longitudinal project like the Mother Tree Project starts to give you data over time as to what's going to allow those ecosystems to adapt and to be more robust. So those long-term research projects are going to be vital for us in understanding what we have to do to change our forest management regime.
Simhayet dawaye. Nawapsh bihanax dawotogu. Gadlan simshan dawatku. Ganhada dipdixu. Bilhamner was noye. Indoexen squamish. Indoexen slawa tooth. Laxupum. Into Willixa Galaxy. My name is Simhayetsk. I'm Simsian from the Gitlan tribe. the House of Spihanaks, Ganhada clan. One of the really interesting things about the Mother Tree Project is how these communities are connected with each other at each of these sites. We get to demonstrate the connections of these mother trees below ground with each other and forming communities. And this is something that we have known in our Aboriginal science for thousands of years. So we're demonstrating the Aboriginal knowledge. We're showing the validity of its existence, the complexity around these forests or in these forests, particularly in the ground. We get to see these interactions of these species below ground and look at how they transfer nutrients and how they engage exchange and communications, something that we're familiar with in the Aboriginal world for sure. When the roots are all connected below ground, it's like our communities. When we're all connected, it keeps us stronger. And so the forest is stronger when these trees are allowed to have those connections with each other.
The marvelous thing about the Mother Tree Project is that it's more complex than just simply the fact that trees communicate with one another and they're connected. The neat thing about the Mother Tree complex is that it maintains a tremendous biodiversity within the soil ecosystem, never mind the above ground, within the soil ecosystem. The mother trees make sure that we maintain a diversity of organisms. And we are convinced, science convinces us, we're not sure if it's correct, but science convinces us that the more diversity, the better we are in terms of being able to maintain stresses, okay, more resilience. So the mother tree concept makes sure that we maintain that diversity. The other thing that happens or is important with the Mother Tree Project is the fact that as we change and we cut down the forest and then we put in a different species, that species may not have the right mycorrhizal association for that particular site. Okay, it might be a different species. But if we have a diversity of organisms to start off with, soon it can restore.
It didn't surprise me that the science has been able to connect, you know, how the plants and how the trees are connected through their ground networks and that, because in our culture, the Intlakup'im culture, as part of the creation stories, at the beginning, plants, animals, people were all essentially the same. They were interchangeable. They could transform back and forth from plant to animal to human and back again. But at some point, transformers came through and said, okay, you are now going to be people, and you are going to be plants, and you're going to be animals, etc. It didn't take away the connections that we have, but we became more as we are today.
This study is looking at ways that we can manage our forests so that we have forests in 20 years. And we're trying to find holistic ways to do this. I feel like the methodology we've developed is really complete. It's comprehensive. We're looking at the soil, what the critters are in the soil, carbon that they're fixing and storing. We're looking at the forest floor, plants, the lichens, the mosses, bryophytes. It feels like when we're out here doing it, that we're really looking so that we can keep biodiversity and carbon in the ground and grow new forests for the future. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to classify the forest floor, and we're going to classify the mineral soil, and then we're going to take some measurements.
Close. Missed by 1 or 2 years.
Move it or?
No.
So I think that there's something for people to learn from, definitely from the ways that forests work together, and from the metaphor of trees being connected underground and how people work together in groups and sort of grow together in groups.
I'm taking note of the depth of the surface substrate and whether it goes from like different soils, so decayed wood or mineral soil, then to mineral soil, or if we hit a rock, we have to note that too.
I have blue and pink in my book.
Okay, yeah.
I'm digging holes every 2 meters along Transect 1 until I hit mineral soil or a rock.
So right now I am affecting all the twigs in the microplot, and the aim is that we can take biomass samples of all the twigs. So this is an example of moss that's on the twigs, so I have to make sure to take it off.
My favorite part of the job is this, probably. I take a lot of notes for trees. It gets kind of stressful, but it's fun. And I'm really good at it.